All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Lambie from Red Brick Communications. I want to start off by thanking, first of all, AMO for letting us have these calls weekly. We're talking about possibly doing these every 2 weeks and playing around with the schedule a little bit. I can play around with the schedule because I've got a group of about 15 people who have volunteered to be panelists whenever we need them. That is really very much appreciated. Every week, we do try to spread the load around. Communications people, like everyone else, are very, very busy right now. So you're being very generous with your time, and I appreciate it. I'm going to introduce the panel. We do every week have a mix of people from places large and small. This week, I usually start with the biggest and go down to the smallest, and I'm not sure who the smallest is on this call. It might be you, Cheri. Millio from the city of Mississauga, Communications Director. We've got Tony Iavarone from the city of Waterloo. Justin Bromberg is from the county of Prescott-Russell, which I think is just slightly larger than the town of Newmarket, which has about 90,000 people as well. Wanda Bennett from the town of Newmarket. We've got Cheri Davidson from the city of Kawartha Lakes, which is, well, it's the city of Kawartha Lakes. Like Justin, the two of you cover massive geographies with lots of villages. And Ivana brought backup. We've got Laurel Shutt as well from the city of Mississauga, who's been, Mississauga is big, folks, so they divide and conquer. So we're glad to have everybody on the call. Thank you very much. We have a schedule for some of the panelists from the past are probably on the schedule or on the call here. So I'll just do a little bit of bookkeeping. We have a schedule that's going to take us through for the next couple of weeks. So the panelists will get invites. If you're on these calls and you want to be a panelist, let me know. If you fit that perfect profile for a municipality of the right size, we may include you. But we are probably going to move to doing these every 2 weeks and then doing them once a month just before Canada Day. So that schedule will roll out, but we think it's time to maybe just relax the weekly schedule. We'll see. We're going to put that to a vote later so you can let us know. All right, there are a couple of topics that we want to start off on today, but as always, I put it out to the panel or to the members who are on the call to let us know what you want to talk about and what motivated you to be here. We got about 125 people on the call, and usually there's great answers in the room. You can use the chat function, which is, if you're not familiar with Zoom, all the stuff you want is probably at the bottom of your screen or at the top if you're on a tablet or a phone. But you can use the question and answer feature or the chat feature. If you have information for everybody, make sure you're communicating to everyone on the call. And just for those nefarious folks that want to communicate on the call, if we get bombed by or hacked or bombed by something or someone nefarious, we are going to take that in stride because we're curious about how you're managing that aspect of things as well. It's a communications issue. So I'm not saying we want it, but we'll take it in stride if it happens. All right. The topics I want to start out with, let's go into meetings. So we have a number of clerks that have joined the call in the last couple of weeks. I know there's a lot of discussions around meetings. So I want to start out with how challenging was it for you to move to online meetings? Is there anything in particular that you found particularly helpful in making them work? And how are they going now? Are there any challenges that you still have? And I'll just open it up to the panel.
We can start, Brian, if that's okay. So Mississauga has had, I think, our third council meeting virtually. The mayor is the host, and they have partnered quite well with IT. She's got a nice setup. She calls it the Brady Bunch setup, where she gets to see all the councillors online. And how we've handled the public question period is we've actually asked people to email the clerk directly. So I know you have a number of clerks online. So the clerk will ask the questions and then direct it to members of council and then respond to the individuals afterwards. So we've had great success. So I just say, I don't know if you want to name what we're using, but it's not Zoom, but we've had great success using WebEx to manage those meetings. And what they've done is change the format. So now we actually have council meetings every week. And tomorrow, which is a council day, they will review the rest of the committees to understand whether council just wants to proceed as is or change the format going forward.
Okay. I'm particularly interested in if any of you that maybe don't have a large budget for these things and have had to MacGyver a situation. And I don't know whether anybody falls into that category on this call. But who had did anybody have some challenges in terms of getting it set up, and how did you resolve those challenges? I'm not seeing a lot from the panel, so I'm going to keep moving on. Any other comments just on meetings in general in terms of how you made it work?
Likewise, Brian, we had our first virtual council meeting in late March. It was maybe about a week and a half after things started to shut down, including our offices, and it went fairly well. We have a council of 8 mayors, and we did a test run the day before. A couple of them called in the day of the meeting. We held it. We went live at the same time. We used Microsoft Teams, and we were very fortunate to have the IT systems in place, and that's full credit to our IT department for having things like Microsoft Teams in place before all of this began, which just made it that much easier to manage and to get things set up. So the test run went fairly smoothly, and the council meeting itself went very smoothly. It was streamed live through Microsoft Teams at the same time. The video is now available on our website. We're having our next council meeting tomorrow. And as far as committees, we've canceled all committees of council, including committee of the whole, until actually committee of the whole will come back in early May, but we postponed a couple of committee of the wholes in the meantime, and just to get everyone used to doing this and really keeping business to urgent matters.
And then, so you're using WebEx. I think some are using Zoom. Are there any other platforms that people are using for this? Is anybody using like GoToMeetings or any of that stuff, or is it all Zoom and WebEx? Anything else that you've seen people using for it?
We're also WebEx, Brian, and so that's really only for those that are participating in the meeting, and then we live stream as we always have. And similar to what Ivana mentioned, we're asking people to send in any questions to the clerk directly.
Okay, so if anybody's got questions around meetings, and the questions that are coming in, by the way, are perfect. They're the questions that we thought we should focus on. So I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the questions that are coming in, because it usually starts slow and then people get inspired. So take another swig of coffee and get your questions ready. But the areas that we wanted to focus on before the call are dovetailing well with the questions we're getting. We want to look at, we will discuss enforcement. Weather's getting warmer, people are getting busier, people are going squirrely. What are we doing about enforcement? Accessibility, to what extent, like I still think we're looking for good advice for everybody in terms of how they're managing accessibility. I've raised the topic a few times on the call, but I think we're still looking for magic bullets there. The financial impact that you're experiencing in your municipality and how you're coping, and that has very much been in the news. Return to work and economic recovery, and how you are managing the capacity and staffing. Now, some of the other questions that have come in is, how has your messaging evolved? The first week, it was very obviously kind of crisis messaging. What are people focusing on now? That's a major component of these calls always, so we'll go there as well. There was a question, Ivana, I know you're going to be on this one, but and probably Tony would have some thoughts on this one potentially as well. Although Waterloo Transit is regional, but how are you managing transit? And this issue of transit and tax deferrals is really bundled together, because we got transit systems that are running for free in many cases, and we have a lot of pressure for people to defer taxes. So anyway, those two don't line up very well. We've got a question here related to labor matters, so we'll have a look at that in a moment. And anyway, I'm just going to keep moving along here. I think the next one that we'll touch on, based out of that bundle, is enforcement. So this has really been a big issue, and I know that it was an issue for the Rural Ontario Municipal Association. We had a long chat about it on a board meeting on Friday. There's a concern that as the weather warms and fishing seasons open up and cottages open up, that people are going to be racing to cottage country even more so than they have. And the messaging on this has been a bit mixed from the province. They've told people that it's business as usual for things like fishing regulations, but at the same time, they're telling people to stay home. So Roma put out a message that kind of wove this as best we could on Friday. Not many people have seen it, went out late on Friday, but it does provide, I think, a good path to navigate some of these tricky areas. But I'm going to open it up to those of you who are worried about enforcement. Is it a communications tool? And what are you thinking that the next month or your next week or month is going to look like for you? Can I call on Ivana to start there? Because I know that.
Yeah, I sure can. Oh, wow. So a couple of things with enforcement. Here's the issue. It's complicated. Parks, for example, are open in Mississauga, but the amenities are closed. We have provincial orders that we're enforcing, definitely, but we have guidelines, and we don't actually have a bylaw in Mississauga in terms of social distancing, for example. Maybe other municipalities have that, but we don't have that. Layer on that we're in the GTA, and there's messages around all of us that differ. So communication is a challenge. In fact, we are finding that residents are asking us very detailed questions. As I said earlier to the panelists, can we play Frisbee in a field? Can we use our equipment that we bring in and actually use the park amenities? And the answer is no, but it's also complicated. So for us, our enforcement team and legal are going to educate council tomorrow to really try and understand how detailed we need to go and whether in fact we need an additional bylaw. So enforcement's a huge issue. I'll just leave you with the fact that we turned away 3,000 cars on the weekend from our parks. So people are not getting the message with respect to staying home, and that continues to be one of our big challenges with respect to enforcement.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this one?
It hasn't been too bad in the city of Waterloo. Excuse me. Kitchener is struggling a bit more than we are as far as one of our municipal partners goes. And so they've been a little stricter in some of their enforcement. We have seen, as Ivana mentioned, we have seen some people congregate at Waterloo Park, which is sort of the central sort of jewel of park that we have in the city. And so this weekend, for the first time, we closed the parking lots because we were finding people were driving to that location and playing, Frisbee and catch a little bit. So once our bylaw folks told them to move along, they did comply. But just to try to eliminate all of that, we did close it, and we received no real negative pushback from the community. I think they were kind of expecting it, and so far so good.
I would add to that, Tony. We have two police forces. We have OPP and we have a City of Fort Lakes police force, and so we were really gearing up for the Easter long weekend. Really, quite ahead of the messaging we felt. And what I thought one of our police forces did really well was they did a tweet saying, "I feel like a real schmuck today. I had to ask a guy to leave our park." We don't like doing this. It seems strange, but we have to do it. We're being as nice as we can, and thanks everybody for coming alongside. And I think that really helped get people on side, and we've had a lot around our boat launches. We've had a lot of residents writing in saying, I have a kayak. I just went to this boat launch and it's a big closed sign. Why is it closed? It's just me out on the water. I'm not hurting anybody. And so you're right, Ivana, managing that message to say, well, we know that single-use watercraft is probably not a big risk, but when we open the door to one, we open it to others, and we really need you to stay home. And so, yeah, we've just been very, very careful and as kind as we can be while still drawing a clear line in our.
Yeah, and maybe sorry, Cheri. Maybe I'll chime in too. Agreed that it's much more complex. For example, Newmarket is very small, very dense, and on a longer trail system, we basically have almost three different ownerships. We have York Region Forests that were closed, then just reopened. Then we have Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority that also closed their trails, but it runs right through our trail system. So it gets really complex, and people are walking along a trail that we're saying is opened, and then they hit these closure signs. So that's been a real challenge, trying to communicate the complexities of the trail system in itself. And so it's a little bit more complex than we think.
Okay, so threading some of that together, we had a great line, I think last week from Lisa Casey from the City of New Brunswick, or Town of New Brunswick, City of New Brunswick, who was saying, you can exercise but not socialize in our parks. And so it's good, nice, efficient message that we liked. With respect to, after a long discussion with a lot of mayors on this one, and I sometimes think we should maybe have calls like this just for mayors to talk to one another. But anyway, they landed on, rather than deal with all the people that are trying to find out where the exceptions are, just make sure that people really understand just how much is closed, and that they should call ahead and go to your municipal websites. So hopefully the information's there. So they don't go to a cottage country expecting to do something and get very disappointed when they get to the other end. I know some of the bylaws, the bylaw values are like the fines are quite steep. So I want to ask that question as well. When you have to fine somebody, what's the size of those fines? Because I'm finding in the GTA, the fines are in the $750 to $800 range, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm wondering if that's the case across the province. Any others can weigh in on that? If I get jabbed in your municipality, what's that going to cost me? No one wants to say.
In our municipality, as you know, Brian, those are the fines. So you want to definitely, I think Cheri said it well, it's about inform and educate before enforcement. That's for sure the temperament that our bylaw officers are taking. So I think most people are very good about understanding that. It's just really the ones that aren't going to pay attention to those bylaws that are going to receive those fines.
Yeah, I think the other message that's part and parcel with this is we've seen the devastating effect that it's having on long-term care facilities. And you know, I think one of the challenges in rural areas, people say, oh, I'm not jerking my life around because of a Toronto problem. And I see that on social media feeds a lot. This is an urban problem. It's not my, you know, our life is different than yours, so go away. But the reality is it's the rural long-term care facilities, I think, that are often at, well, they're at very high risk. And a lot of the cases we've seen with long-term care facilities are rural areas. So I think we need to find a way to connect those dots for people as well, and make sure they understand that that's who we're protecting is older people in rural communities when we've got concerns about cottagers. There is a question there specifically for Kawartha Lakes. How is Kawartha Lakes preparing for cottagers? And Justin, you're probably in that boat as well. Thoughts there on what you're doing to get messages out to people who maybe are seasonal residents?
Well, our mayor came out front and center weeks ago and said, listen, we have 30,000 seasonal residents that pay taxes all year long and have a right to come up and check on their property. They have a right to come up and self-isolate if they so choose. All we ask is they follow the rules, follow the directives, bring their own supplies, stay safe. And so we've seen and heard a lot of varying comments on whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, in line with the Premier or not. But our mayors continue to be consistent on, we're not going to turn our backs on you when you just come back from Florida. You know, you can come and do your 14-day at your seasonal residence in Kawartha Lakes, but you got to follow the rules like everybody else. And so I think we'll just continue to roll that messaging out. I know there's been a lot of goodwill developed around seasonal owners who are saying, thank you for recognizing I am a part of your community through good and through bad, and this is our place for these 4-6 months of the year, and I'm glad you didn't close the door on us. Now, having said that, at the same time, we have Pinecrest in our community, so we've been really hard hit. Bob Cajun is a 3,500 community that's now had 33 deaths, and so that same community is looking to that same mayor to say, okay, does this keep us safe? And for the most part, I think he's come out very a very positive light, because he's been very clear and consistent and in line with what our healthcare authorities are asking. He's never wavered from that. So our messaging will continue to be the same as cottagers start to come up. It's whatever the rule is of the day, you got to follow that.
Okay. If you want to see a really good example of weaving this difficult topic, I draw you to a Toronto Life article from about 2 weeks ago. There was an interview with the mayor of Muskoka Lakes. And it was one of those kind of question and answer interviews where he rolls through. And I just thought the mayor, for an elected official, tackling a very difficult set of questioning, a sensitive topic, he did a great job. The key to this, I think, is to make sure that you're not talking about residents versus non-residents, that's where you fall into problems. I think what you need to talk about is making sure that we have the capacity to look after everybody who's here. And we don't care where you're from. We just need to make sure that our hospital can take it, our grocery stores can take it, our pharmacies can take it. And he did a really nice job of kind of weaving through that, that tact. So it's a Toronto Life article, which should be easy to find. I'll tweet it out later today from my personal Twitter account. All right. The other one I want to move on to is the financial impact. There's been a lot of discussion this week about what it's doing to balance sheets. TV Ontario is about to do probably a panel discussion on this. It was really heated up a week ago, about 10 days ago. The mayor of Vancouver said that Vancouver could go bankrupt. Most people said, no, it can't. But that really put a spotlight on how people are managing. The other piece to that was 2 days ago, Clarington. There's a report in CBC that Clarington is talking about waiving property taxes for certain low-income individuals. They're the only municipality that we've seen that's entertained this notion, but don't be surprised if it happens in Clarington. They're going to come knocking on your door next, and are you ready for that question? So how are you coping from a financial standpoint? It also involves layoffs. Who wants to go first on that tricky topic?
I'll start off, Brian. So like many municipalities, we're facing a shortfall. We're taking a report to council on April 27, in which we'll lay out what the shortfall will be. Internally, we've also been focusing on cost containment because there is some savings that we are going to be realizing from things that we're not doing. So some of the capital projects that we think we can defer that'll help offset the shortfall, but there will be a shortfall. We did lay off part-time, casual, and seasonal employees effective April 13th. That was about 640 people. That saves us about $212,000 a month. So that was a tough decision. It was difficult to do. To this point, we've kept our employees whole, and we're not considering that. But I mean, these things, it's always fluid, but at this point, those are the measures that we're looking at.
Okay, anyone else on this?
Very similar for us, Brian, in Mississauga. We've had temporary layoffs as well in the range of about 2,000 of our part-time temporary casual workers. We've also had a temporary hiring freeze that we've announced, and our early estimate to council was that by June we would be in a shortfall about $40 to $50 million. So council already has given our residents a bit of a look at that, and we'll be coming back with additional details to understand what that might look like. We've deferred property tax. We have not canceled them, so deferred for 3 months as part of our understanding the needs of those in the community. And I think there's more to come, but at this point, that's what we're looking at. So those are large numbers for municipalities, as you know.
Okay, I'm going to, did anyone else just dying to weigh in on that one? All right. So AMO early on in this realized that, there's only so much AMO can do to keep people healthy, but there's probably a lot that AMO could do to help with the economic recovery and to look at the financial condition for municipalities. So this is an area where AMO is very, very active. If you are not already patched into some of the policy items that AMO sends out, I really encourage you to get on top of those. Quite frankly, became a mission of ours about 2 years ago to start making sure that communications managers were patched into those communications coming out of AMO. So some of you are part of that process. We do allow one person from every municipality to be their kind of designated communications manager to be on that network. So if you want to sign up for that, we're happy to pursue that. We'll make sure that you're the only one and that you're not competing with a colleague. The ones you want to watch for is the AMO watch file, which goes out every Thursday morning, has a lot of this information. There's policy updates that go out regularly. AMO has been putting out COVID messages almost every day. And in addition to that, there's a COVID-19 webpage where you get all of these webinars are recorded. Every one we've had is posted on that webpage, along with webinars related to conducting meetings and a number of other topics. There are a number of questions coming in on the chat box today that deal with operational challenges for municipalities. What do we do with landscapers? What do we do with people going to waste management sites? I don't think the communications folks necessarily are going to have those answers, but I think that those questions should go through to AMO's COVID-19 page. And AMO may be able to provide information there that's of general, like if you're asking that question, others probably are. So there's a COVID-19 email address for AMO specifically to find ways that AMO could be helpful. And you definitely want to make sure, and Petra from AMO has just posted the links to that page. So thank you, Petra. All right, I'm going to keep moving along here to the return to work and economic recovery. Is this an area that you're already messaging on? What are you telling people about economic recovery? What do what is that transition to that messaging starting to look for? Justin, thanks for coughing into your elbow there. That's perfect. But I'm wondering if we can get a sense of how we're making that transition to start talking about getting things opened up again. Tony, you're nodding. Is that something you could start with? Oh, you're on mute there, Tony. You're on mute, and it's gold. We don't want to miss a word.
Sorry, thank you. So yeah, this seems to be the story interest of the day for our local media. So what we've been doing throughout the pandemic, everything that we do is done at a regional basis. So we have a regional pandemic control group and the CEO control group. So that's 8 CEOs from the 7 local municipalities in the region. They meet every other day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I believe. And so that it is something that they're now talking about. And essentially what we're saying is that, similar to what we're hearing from the province and from the federal government, that it will be gradual, will be slow, but what we will do will be guided by likely guidelines that comes out of the province, or there might even be directives. So it's something we're talking about, but it's not something that we're going to be able to do in isolation. As we all know, this isn't a light switch kind of a thing. It's going to be slow, but we're also looking at how do we involve the business community, because that's obviously an important part of all of this.
All right. Anyone else on this?
Sure.
Yeah.
What I'll add on the financial side, we're same thing, going to be looking at the province and looking at ways where we can start to open things up, but we're not there yet. But on the financial side, we're launching a program today, actually, called a Business Assistance Concierge Program, where we have 10 experts that will be advising small businesses to navigate through the financial assistance. So hoping that something like that will be helpful. And yeah, just looking at the future and what messaging we have.
Okay, anyone else on this before we go? The other one I know that has come up on past calls is some municipalities have put out resources of where you can order food in their municipality to keep restaurants alive. Without saying go and do it and it's safe, they've just sort of said, if you're doing it, this is where it is. There's a number of examples that I think in St. Catharines, there's a good example where there's websites that have been set up for that. Alan Greenwood has weighed in from Simcoe County, and I was waiting for Alan to come out of the woodwork. Simcoe County is a great resource for this kind of stuff, and true to form, Alan has posted a nice little essay there in the chat box, just talk about all the great things they're doing at Simcoe County. Provide links to all those resources, videos that they produced, and contact information. So that's exactly what these calls are for. Thank you, Alan. That's much appreciated. And while we haven't had you as a panelist on here, I think that's just because you're busy and I'm busy. So thanks for weighing in there. We got a great question of whether or not people are including elected officials in their emergency management meetings. Let's weigh that out to the panels. Are we including elected officials in your emergency management meetings? My guess is yes, but what's their role and how does that come together? How active are they?
We haven't been having sort of emergency management meetings per se. I think at the very beginning we were treating them as such, but every morning for the last few weeks we've had a staff. Senior staff management roundtable, if you will, virtually. Although we've cut those down to now 2 a week, and of course we'll pick them back up if things progress or if the situation becomes more dire. But for the time being, those have largely been staff meetings.
Okay. Anyone else on this?
Same in Waterloo, Brian. Staff meetings, but as I mentioned, there's a regional pandemic control group, and that has elected officials on it.
We have a meeting twice a week and the mayor attends, and then we have additional incident management team meetings as similar to what Justin's mentioned. So definitely the mayor gets an update at least twice. It used to be 3 times a week, but it's now down to twice a week.
So this is a really tricky topic, and I don't want to put any of the panelists on the spot. But the other area where I've seen the rubber hit the road on this is elected officials that are really kind of weighing in to micromanage some of the issues around layoffs and how they manage layoffs. And I've found a number of situations where I've seen elected officials asking each other about what the labor laws say and what that looks like. So I suspect there are people on this call that have been uncomfortable at times with what is the role of council in terms of navigating these things. So we're not going to put this panel on the spot on that, but I am going to draw you to a couple of other things we're doing, unless any of the panelists want to dive in, but risky territory. Nigel Belchamber and Fred Dean do a number of how-to guides and sort of showing what's appropriate and where the lines are for elected officials. Nigel is about to do a series of webinars or of podcasts with a municipal CAO. And we can probably get this topic onto those podcasts. So those are going to be AMO podcasts, 3 of them scheduled between Nigel and a CAO, talking about best practices. So that's coming. In addition, we've got a Hicks-Morley labor call that is essentially this format, but it's the labor lawyers at Hicks-Morley answering people's questions. And a lot of the questions that are coming in today in particular are probably questions that would be good for this Hicks-Morley panel to deal with. It's exactly the same format as this. If you want to get on that call, email the COVID-19 email address at AMO. It has come up in the chat box there. That call is Wednesday at, I believe, Wednesday early afternoon, 1:30, I think. But I bet Petra will be able to get us those details in a moment. All right. I'm going to talk about just the capacity and staffing, because that does touch on the same point. There were some labor provisions that came out this week that give municipality greater flexibility in terms of how they allocate staff from one area to another, and that will be a topic for that labor call, certainly. But Cheri, you mentioned about how you have had to get creative to deal with teams that are tired and maybe allocate some other people into other areas. And I'm curious about this question of whether you've recruited non-communicators or just other people to incorporate them into your communications teams, what you've learned there and how that's going. And I'm going to start with you, Cheri, if that works.
Sure. So a couple of weeks ago, we developed a gap list of things that were starting to fall off the radar that weren't necessarily pure comms. So we have a team of 3, and we're all hands on deck with our twice weekly mayor messaging, managing the media. We have twice weekly media scrums. Those things that the list of staff that we had outlined that had a number of communication skills, we weren't looking to replace those core skills, but we were looking to make sure that accessibility, quality control on our website, social media monitoring, and responding to a huge volume of questions, comments, and direct messages were getting done, and we just couldn't keep up with that. So we made a short list of largely our content contributors, so people in other divisions who are updating web pages, they're managing media accounts of their own, but not the main city accounts. And then just shortlisted those based on who was available, who was possibly not working full time. And so we have a B team coming together to support us. And that's wonderful, because not only are they going to help us in the coming weeks as we get back up to recovery, but we'll then have a B team for the next emergency to call on. So that's been a good step over the last week.
Anyone else want to weigh on that in terms of how you're managing? Just for Cheri, can you walk us through the numbers? I think you're 3,000 square kilometers and about 90,000 residents. Am I right?
That's right. Yep. We're the size of a small province, and we've got, close to 100,000 residents in the summer.
So real challenges there. I think for the larger municipalities, it's pretty evident that it's easier to pull from other places. Justin, I'm wondering if you've expanded your team at all, and what does it look like where you are? You've got a similar profile to Cheri's.
Yeah, no, I mean, we haven't expanded the team per se. I think it's just that it's all hands on deck. I'm certainly collaborating, not that collaboration wasn't happening before, but there's a lot more exchanges happening between all department heads and myself. I'm lucky that I have a colleague who was previously helping manage our social media channels, and I've, for the purposes of this situation, I've taken a larger role in that. Just because there is so much more interaction happening with the public, questions popping up via Messenger, comments that need replies, information that needs to be almost sometimes circulated. It could, I won't say 24/7, but it happens at odd hours of the day. And so I think, and one more point I'll add to that is that we've established some communications networks or exchange groups with our local municipalities, and that was something that we've been doing for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and a lot of the messages that were going around those tables were just, one of these days there's going to be an emergency, and we're all going to need to be working together as a team and counting on each other. So here we are, and I think it was great that we put faces to names. Before that, a lot of local municipalities brought communications staff on board in the months and even the year leading up to this. So I think the fact that most, if not all, local municipalities, and we've got 8 here, have communication staff, that helps a lot. So we all share one another's messages. We share the health unit's messages, they share ours, things like that. So, yeah.
Okay. I want to have a little chat about plain language and segue that into accessibility. I busted a valve yesterday. My brain snapped. The Minister of Long-Term Care, the Ministry of Health issued a news release yesterday. That news release was written at a grade 12 reading level, and there was a quote from the Minister of Long-Term Care that was at a grade 17 reading level. It included the term congregate settings in it, which I guess is where people meet, right? But I really have this question around plain language, and we put, for the last couple of calls, I've been saying we're going to tackle this plain language thing. We have. More on that in a minute. We'll share something we've put together. But I'm curious about how the members of the panel and the people on this call feel about this. I don't think, like in the long-term care facility where my mother-in-law is, she's got a grade 3 education in Portuguese once upon a time. There's no way on earth that you're going to be able to say, hey, Regina, we have a global pandemic called COVID-19, and we need good hand hygiene from you, and you need to self-isolate and practice social distancing. She is not going to understand a word of that. And long-term care facilities are our highest risk areas right now. So why are we taking all of this language around social distancing and some of these other terms and just parroting that? Or have you pushed back somewhat? Now, we have seen some great examples with the city of Ottawa and their sign of 2 meters apart in the Ministry of Silly Walks. The city of Toronto has had stay about a hockey stick apart from one another. But I'm wondering if, as communications people, we've just kind of thrown up our hands on some of the language of this pandemic, or if it is time for us to push back a little bit and say, particularly if our target is long-term care homes, it's time to get more aggressive on plain language. Thoughts from the panel?
Well, isn't that an ongoing challenge anyway, though, right, Brian? Especially, we all have the same challenge in dealing with our friends in the planning division that like to use, first-year university language often. So I think that's a great point. I think it's something that we do need to be mindful of. And I think that a lot of municipalities are doing good work around using graphics to illustrate what they're talking about around social distancing, like you said, the hockey sticks or whatever it is that kind of is relevant for people. But I think it's a must that we do push back, that we do try to keep things simple. That is an accessibility issue as well. You're right. Excuse me, because we have different literacy levels we're dealing with. So if we don't do more of that, then we're failing our constituents.
Yeah, I think often the conversations that are delivered, like, the officials from the province are preparing information, but that information is probably being interpreted and delivered by personal support workers where, English may be a second language as they speak to someone who's got challenges. So I'm just really concerned there isn't enough plain language out there. That's a bit of a plug because we did promise we would try to tackle this. And we have tried to tackle it. If I can call this up. No, not that. Give me a second. I'll find that. And while I'm finding that, I'm going to just put it out to any other panel members. I'm like, have you raised that with some of the other people in your organizations, and what is their reaction when you do? That's really, I guess, what I'm curious about. Ivana?
Maybe I can talk. I can't speak to long-term care because we don't operate here in the city. It's a regional mandate. But in terms of plain language, we tackled that a number of years ago, where we introduced both plain language training to some of our very operational folks, and we developed a course in conjunction with our local college. We actually now have that, and Laurel can speak a little bit to it, but we've got that as a course. So part of that is to even educate ourselves. And for years, we've actually put that target grade on our news releases, Brian. So we actually put that right up front when we're reviewing news releases to say, if it's grade 21, which by the way was our average here in the city, we can't have that. So we've really looked at targeted at least, if not a grade 12, down to grade 8. We're trying to really get that down as low as possible, to your point. So I think you have to be, number one, aware of it, and number two, then really try and work with your own employees and folks, like Tony said, to make sure that they're not the ones that are actually directing the communication language, but you are, as the person who's helping translate that. So I don't know, Laurel, if you wanted to add anything around the plain language piece.
Sometimes we do a mixture of both, because I think somebody mentioned the planning folk. So if we have teams that are really passionate about a particular term, or there's just not a really great word to use in place of it, we'll say, I think Brian used the example of physical distancing or social distancing. We'll say, we'll use that term, and then we'll say, which means this, right? Like, you have to stay this far apart, spread your arms out, or if you're, that kind of thing. So we try to do a mixture of both when there's just not the opportunity to replace maybe some of the technical terms with a plain language term that will use the term, but then try to explain it in like really, really simple terms so that people get a sense of both.
So I think this might be a great place actually for a role for elected officials. I mean, I think one of the more interesting examples of this is out of the Premier of Nova Scotia, who finally, just in frustration, said, "Stay the blazes at home." And if you follow that at all in Nova Scotia, there's T-shirts, there's hashtags, there's like, everybody just kind of cheered when it was finally that blunt. And that's a classic case where an elected official can just really lay it out for people. Doug Ford's done that well in terms of telling people to just, folks, we just want you to stay home. Like, this is not a time for that. So those messages have come out to some degree in his news conferences. Okay, let's segue over to accessibility. I think, in the first wave of this, there really was a sense that we need to push messages out very, very quickly. There's a lot of change. We've got to communicate all that change, keep people safe. But increasingly, as we get further and further and we settle into a new normal, the pressure to make sure that all that information is accessible has grown. So I'm wondering whether you have made the shift to the point where your messages are 100% accessible, whether you're still kind of like 15%, or whether you're making progress. And you probably don't want to tell me where your gut puts you on that scale. But this is a question we get, and it's a very hot topic for accessibility advocates. They expect it from us. So how are you making out on the accessibility front? And how are you doing it? That's probably the more important thing.
And I'll start with that one. I think we're doing quite well. We put a lot of measures in place recently before this all happened, to make sure that our website was fully accessible. I mean, I don't think we're completely 100% there, but we're getting closer and closer every day. A lot of plain text, a lot of even reviewing some of the language that's like you were just discussing, that's on those websites and in those messages, to make sure that it's at an accessible level. We have the added challenge of being a bilingual municipality, so all of our communications are going out in English and in French. There's just that added challenge on top of that. And just to go back to what you were saying before, we really try to emphasize simple language, get straight to the point. A lot of our messages today go out on Facebook. And I think this is from something that you probably told a group of us communicators some years ago. Keep the posts simple. Always make sure there's an image there. So a lot of our best posts and our most shared and our most read, the ones that get the most engagement are the ones with a great photo or a few great photos and a couple of lines of text. So we're sticking to that.
The photos themselves, we've often heard this, that the photos have to be accessible and captions have to be accessible and all that sort of business. So if you've got a great photograph or a short video on Facebook, are you providing accessible formats of that same thing on that platform? Or are you providing it in other ways? Or are you waiting until somebody asks for it? How attentive are you making sure that a lot of the images that are going out now or infographics are in accessible formats?
I'll speak to that one. One of our key tools has been our mayor's messages that go out twice a week. They're scripted and we videotape them. And I think in the early days, we weren't doing as well for accessibility because we were defaulting to the YouTube captioning. What was great was our local networks. So our Global, our Cogeco, our cable network, they were taking our raw files and playing them on their newscasts. So they were clear enough and succinct, and our mayor is very well-spoken, very simple language kind of guy. His wording was, come on, everybody, we're gonna have to hunker down for the next 2 weeks. And that resonated. But now that we have a little more time to perfect those videos before they're going out, we're putting more focus on, split it half screen, have some really simple bullet points on the left-hand side, looking at the mayor on the right-hand side, just in case the closed captioning doesn't come through just right. But that's been one thing in our next round of accessibility, upping our game. Our website is really, scores really high. All of our printed documents are great, but getting our videos to be fully accessible, I'm a little shakier there, and I think that's. I hope that's where we can maybe as a group start to share more best practices on that.
Okay, I think that's a classic case too. If there's people on this call that are listening and are really proud of what they've done on accessibility, please share that. The COVID-19 page at AMO includes resources. One of the things we look for there is photographs and infographics related to services and areas that you've got out. So for instance, we've been talking to the Ontario Clean Water Agency about trying to get some infographics to help us deal with all the fatbergs that we think are coming in the sewage pipes. When people ran out of toilet paper, they all bought flushable wipes that are not flushable, which means somebody's got to go down a sewer line in the middle of this thing to clean a sewer. So that brings me to my next topic, which is we have an opportunity to help tell the story of municipal service providers that are on the front line and taking risks for the team. We got a call from a Reuters reporter who wanted to get into a hospital to take dramatic photographs of what's going on in hospitals. And he was saying, that story is getting out in the States, but not in Canada. And we said, we actually think that story is getting out in Canada to the extent that they want photographers rooting around an emergency room right now, which they probably don't. The story that's not getting out is all the municipal employees that are taking risks in long-term care homes, in waste management sites, in water and wastewater treatment plants. There are all sorts of people, bylaw officers who have to issue those tickets. There are all sorts of people that are having connections that require them to take on a certain amount of risk. And they're performing important functions, transit, bus drivers, lots of them. So we wanted to convince that Reuters reporter to cover that story. And we're pleasantly surprised that he took the bait. So I'm just going to call up the information for that. If you want to put that out. But I'm wondering, to what extent have the panel members been able to get this broader storytelling done? Have you had a chance to kind of showcase the good things that people are doing? Yeah, I don't think enough of it's getting out. So the other one we did is we do put a call out for paramedics, and we did get a lot of good images around paramedics, and that allowed us to do more of a thank you message. There is a video that went out from AMO that thanks all municipal employees, but it was pulling teeth to get images from services. Justin, you mentioned some of the stuff that you've done on your Facebook page. You're one of those people that we pulled from your Facebook page because there are a lot of those images there. But to what extent are you able to thank all the people that are providing those services, or have you shied away from doing that? Because I'm a little surprised we haven't seen more of that, to be honest with you. Thoughts on that?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Wanda. I was just going to say, you know what? It's not like we haven't thought of it. I think like many of us around the table, we've just really been focused on the message of the day, Brian. And to your point, to ask some of our frontline folks, it's not like we're going outside, we're being asked to stay home, then you've got to really organize that photo. So it's just a little trickier. I think it's all on our mind for sure. And it's definitely something we want to do.
Brian, oh, sorry. We take no credit for this, but the local paper, the Waterloo Record, on their own initiative, they have done a series of stories on municipal employees, from firefighters to bylaw officers to paramedics to all sorts of folks that provide municipal services, and just featured them and what it's like, sort of a day in the life. And that's something that's been quite successful. But that was completely an initiative of the paper. So kudos to them.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things where we are relying on cell phone images that people send in, and that sort of thing. But we found that, what really got it done for the paramedics was one paramedic in particular who said, "I'll tackle this for you." And they spent probably about half an hour taking a whole bunch of really great photos that they sent to us. So we have that if anybody wants paramedic shots. And a lot of them, we specifically asked for very generic ones. So we've got it. And that kind of material is being shared on the AMO COVID-19 page. But look, Wanda, you've got some experience there.
Yeah, so for about a month ago, we launched a program called a Community Positivity Ambassador Program, where our mayor has named 10 community positivity ambassadors every week. And those folks are taking pictures and coming up with campaigns and sharing the hashtag Stand Apart Together. And that has had a massive amount of uptake. So kind of giving the ability for your community to go out and, safely take those photos and share those stories. And that has just been on fire as far as getting those stories and those good messages to our first responders.
Okay, so I've got this here up on the screen. If you do have if you want to feature your people doing great things and you want to line them up with a Reuters photographer to get great images of that, contact Andrew Montgomery in my office. The website or the email address is a little rough there, but it's montgomery@redbrick.ca. And, we're happy to kind of coordinate anybody who's willing to play ball on that to line you up with this Reuters photographer, and away you go. But we do feel that there's a lot of, heroic stories that aren't being told about just basic services. So that's where we're going with that one. All right, we're into the home stretch. We've got just a few minutes left. I'll put a Hail Mary out for any last questions we're getting. One of the ones that did come in was coordination between different municipalities, and particularly on two tiers, how to make that work. We've had this question before, and I'm a little worried that I know Tony can answer this really, really well, because everybody in Kitchener-Waterloo gets along really well. So I don't want to pick on Tony again. Ivana, how about Peel Region? How do you make it work in Peel Region? How does everybody get along and get together and make sure the messaging's consistent?
The nice thing about the Communicators is actually we are part of a regional communicators group. So we've actually assigned somebody from our team to meet with them. And I think they were meeting almost once a day. Now I think they've gone a little bit 2 or 3 times a week. So that really connects us to the alignment piece, Brian, because you have to align. You have to align to the Peel or the health office's message. And so that really keeps us connected. And then we also are connected through our emergency manager coordinator at the regional level. So there's at least 2 ways. The mayor herself is connected a 3rd way where she's on a call. So I think you have to look at all the touch points and make sure that you, depending on your role, are connected with your regional counterparts. And I think that's how you make it work.
Anyone else on that? And just before we go to the next person, somebody mentioned about Echo Dev to the panelists, said that they do a Friday week social media thanking frontline workers. Can you send that message to all attendees and let us know where you're from? Because it's not clear to us. If you've got a solution, make sure we know where you're calling from so others can patch in, or where you're providing that. But any other thoughts on how you coordinate? Justin?
Sure. You know, I think it's just we're talking about coordinating just in general, like getting staff services together and then sharing all that information
Between governments, how do we get multiple governments coordinating? You know, I mean, I think this call helps to do that, quite frankly. There is a desire to get it done. But I think those places that do it well, and maybe Tony can weigh in here, the places that do it really well do it all the time and have been doing it for years. So I think one of the takeaways from this is don't wait until you have a moment like this to build that kind of network. And while, you know, there can be tension between different types of government, we really do see it. I mean, I'm just going to flat out say it. Kitchener-Waterloo area, those people tend to row in the same direction regularly. And I'm sure that's paying dividends right now. Tony, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, thanks, Brian. Yeah, and that's exactly right. It isn't something that we just started now. It is something that it's just part of the culture within the region. I think, honestly, a little bit is because we all want to stay distinct municipalities, so it's in our best interest to make sure we get along so there isn't any perception or pressure that we perhaps have a different model of government. So it's worth it to us to get along well. But I think, again, it's the culture. It is the way that we tend to do things, and the borders are contiguous. So you can't tell Kitchener from Waterloo and Cambridge from Kitchener when you're driving through unless you happen to spot the sign. So it just doesn't make sense to folks if there aren't some similarities and some consistency. And it saves us some time and it saves us some money if we're on the same page. Doesn't mean there aren't disagreements sometimes with the townships in particular, because there is that urban-rural difference that you mentioned, but you work through it, and if sometimes you don't agree, then that's okay. You just agree to disagree.
No, Brian.
Yep.
So I'll echo Tony's comments. It's I think you have to develop those groups before these things happen, and we're lucky to have it, whether it's intermunicipal or relationships with our MPs or MPPs, and I'm not just talking specifically for Prescott-Russell, but all across Eastern Ontario, and Cheri can attest to this too. All the counties across Eastern Ontario have had great connections to the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. There's been a lot of support, emailing, a few calls. Whether it being on labor relations issues, whether it be on long-term care issues, and communications issues. You know, the communications group within Eastern Ontario has reached out to each other a few times just to say, hey, what are you guys doing for town hall webinars? And so having those systems in place, having those groups in place, I think it really helps break down barriers. Well, it certainly helps bring down barriers, and it never at a better time than this.
That's a great point, actually. You know, the regular communications people will know that there are many networks around the province, but some people that are being thrown into this may not know that those networks are well established. So there's a great network in Eastern Ontario that's been growing. And Justin, if anybody wants to patch into that, I'm going to tell them to get in touch with you to find out about that. Alan Greenwood, Simcoe County, provided his contact information. The Simcoe County Communicators do a great job of that. I believe York Region has something. Wanda's nodding her head. I'm sure there's something around Peel. I know there's another group around the Canadian Public Relations Society that operates out of the sort of Hamilton, Burlington area. So there are groups like this that you can patch into, which are along the same format as this, but more regionally specific. All right, I've got time for one last question. So that goes to Tony M. What guidance can you offer about attribution, permissions, etc.? We want to share retweet stories on social, but we're leery given privacy and copyright issues. So I'm going to weigh in on my thoughts on this, and then I'll let the panel tidy it up with something that makes more sense. But you should have criteria, red light, green light, yellow light criteria on what material you share and what material you don't share, so that you are not making this up every single time, that people have a good understanding of what that looks like. Wanda Bennett's got a social media policy that includes a red light, green light, yellow light model in it. And I think it's available on your website somewhere. I think the policy's there. There's some other policies on Red Brick's website that do the same sort of thing. The other thing is just reach out and ask. If you want to use a photo, the answer that you get normally is yes. You do, and it pays to ask. You don't want to have somebody come back and be upset with you. But I think a lot of people are reluctant to use that perfect photo because they think the person will say no. It's not that hard to track people down. Steph Latch in our office, who's on this call, is famous for finding people in Kuala Lumpur and getting permission to use their photos in 15 minutes. He's that kind of guy. So just don't be shy. If you like it, assume they're going to say yes, find them, get that quick approval, and use it, right? But do make sure there's some structure so that there's some consistency. I'd also say that if you're just talking about all your messages like stay out of our parks, people won't like you very much over time. But if you are retweeting other people's information and being a good part of the neighborhood, that's going to help build a better social media following for you over time as well. Anybody else want to weigh in on this one? Okay, hammer that one pretty hard. Okay, I'm going to thank the panelists. We are having a call again in another week. I've got to tag the panelists for next week to let them know who they are. But again, I want to thank those people who have been willing to serve as panelists. If you've got questions or topics that you want us to cover next week, let us know. We really do value the chance to hear what people are experiencing on the ground. I want to thank AMO and put you on to all of AMO's resources around COVID-19, their COVID-19 page, which is just, it's like everything else on AMO. It's pages and pages and pages that you have to sift through, but there's tons of material there. And next stop for a lot of people is probably that legal call that will, I know, address a lot of the issues that people are encountering. We're also doing a webinar, by the way, folks. I'm doing a webinar a podcast this week with Municipal World Ontario about Municipal World magazine, about how to deal with trolls and Facebook anger. We're getting into the point where we're getting a backlash, so we think that's timely. So Municipal World will have that podcast out, and it's a summary of a lot of things that we've covered off in past communications webinars for AMO. AMO has also put all of our past communication webinars on the COVID-19 page. You can download them. There is a cost. I think it's about $30 to get access to those recorded webinars, but they cover off a lot of the same topics. All right, so I'm just going to sign off. Thank everybody again. If you've got questions for next week or you want to make sure you're getting these, get access to these notices, you have to let us know so we can sign you up to our network or AMO's network. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.